The cold winds of war had taken their toll on Captain Ryan Foster. His uniform, once pristine, now showed signs of countless battles fought and survived. His face was lined with exhaustion, his eyes haunted by the horrors he had seen. The war had been long, and he had grown tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the endless killing, and tired of seeing his comrades fall one by one. The only thing that kept him going was the mission. He had a duty to finish, and he couldn't turn back now. But deep down, he yearned for a moment of peace, a brief escape from the never-ending chaos. It was during one of these rare moments of rest, as he wandered through the desolate terrain of a far-off planet, that he stumbled upon something unexpected. The planet was supposed to be abandoned, a place of no importance, just another world caught in the crossfire of the war. But as Ryan trudged through the barren landscape, a glint of something caught his eye. It was faint, almost hidden by the overgrown vegetation, but it was there. A structure. Curious, Ryan made his way toward it, his boots crunching on the dry ground. The air smelled of decay, the stench of a world left behind. As he neared the building, he saw that it wasn't a military installation or a research outpost. No, this was different. It was an alien colony, long abandoned. The walls were cracked, and the windows were shattered. It seemed as if time had frozen here. The once vibrant colors of the alien architecture had faded into muted shades of gray and brown, and the ground was littered with debris. It was a place of death, of silence, and of loss. Ryan's heart skipped a beat when he noticed movement in the shadows. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm strapped to his waist, but as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw what was causing the motion. It was a figure. Two figures, actually. He blinked, his mind racing. The creatures were small, no taller than a child, with fragile, thin frames. They had smooth, almost translucent skin that shimmered in the faint light, and their faces were delicate, with large, almond-shaped eyes that glowed softly in the darkness. They were aliens, and they didn't look hostile. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. What were they doing here? They seemed out of place, their frail bodies a stark contrast to the harsh environment around them. They were huddled together, shivering in the cold, their clothes tattered and worn. They looked like they hadn't eaten in days, if not longer. Ryan hesitated for a moment, his soldier instincts warning him not to trust them. But the longer he looked at them, the more he realized that these creatures weren't a threat. They were vulnerable. Slowly, he approached them, his hand still resting on his weapon, though now he wasn't sure whether he should draw it or not. The aliens didn't seem to notice him at first. They were too focused on each other, their thin hands holding onto one another as if the contact were their only source of comfort. They looked up when Ryan took another step closer, and for a moment, neither of them moved. One of the aliens, the larger of the two, slowly stood up and stepped forward. Ryan could see that its eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else in them too. A flicker of hope, maybe, or maybe it was simply the instinct to survive. The smaller alien remained seated, its eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Ryan took a deep breath, his voice calm as he spoke. "Are you all right?" The alien blinked, its head tilting slightly as if trying to understand the strange sounds coming from Ryan's mouth. It looked down at the other twin, then back at Ryan. And for a moment, Ryan wondered if he had made a mistake. Maybe they didn't understand human speech. But then, to his surprise, the larger alien spoke, its voice soft and melodic. "We are hungry," it said, though its words were broken and choppy, as if it was struggling to form them. The sound of its voice was unlike anything Ryan had ever heard before, a beautiful, lilting tone that carried an air of sadness. Very hungry. Ryan's heart sank. He had nothing to offer them. His rations were limited, and he needed every last bit of food for himself. But something about their desperate, pleading eyes made him pause. The larger alien's voice was shaky, and it seemed almost embarrassed to admit its need. The other alien, the smaller one, had its eyes fixed on Ryan now, its expression one of silent hope. Without thinking, Ryan reached into his pack and pulled out the last of his rations. He hadn't planned on sharing it, but there was something about these twins that made him feel a strange sense of compassion. They were alone here, abandoned, hungry, and afraid, just like him. "Here," he said, extending the packet of food toward the alien twins. "I don't have much, but this should help." The larger alien hesitated, its large eyes scanning Ryan's face. For a moment, Ryan thought it might refuse, but then, without warning, it reached out and took the food from him. It brought it to its mouth, the strange alien eyes fixed on Ryan as it tasted the food for the first time. The smaller alien, still sitting on the ground, watched in silence. Ryan couldn't tell if it was waiting for permission or if it simply didn't have the energy to move. So without a word, Ryan knelt down beside the smaller twin and offered it some of the remaining food. The creature's hands trembled as it took it, but its eyes were filled with gratitude. Ryan watched them eat, their frail bodies trembling with every bite. He could see that they were exhausted, their energy slowly returning as they consumed the food. It was a small act, but to them, it meant the world. For the first time in what seemed like forever, they had a taste of survival. They had a chance. As the twins finished the food, the larger one stood up and stepped toward Ryan. There was no fear in its eyes now, only gratitude. "Thank you," it said, its voice no longer trembling. It was still broken, still imperfect, but it carried a sense of relief. Ryan nodded, not sure what to say. He had done what anyone would have done in his place, but there was something more in the air, something unspoken. The twins looked at him differently now, not with suspicion or fear, but with a bond, a silent understanding that they were no longer alone. The soldier looked down at the twins, his heart heavy. He had saved them from hunger, but what about the rest of the planet? What had happened to their people? He could see the shadows of loss in their eyes, the weight of a once great civilization, now reduced to nothing more than remnants in a forgotten world. As the wind howled through the empty streets, Ryan made a silent promise to himself and to the twins. He wouldn't leave them. Not like this. He would stay. He would protect them. Little did he know, this simple act of feeding the alien twins would change everything. The road ahead would be filled with difficult choices, and the bond between them would grow stronger in ways that none of them could have ever imagined. But for now, in that moment, the soldier and the twins stood together in the ruins of a fallen world, united by one simple truth. They weren't alone anymore. The days after Ryan had fed the twins passed quietly, but something in the air had changed. The once cold and distant silence between him and the aliens had begun to soften. Every morning, he woke up to see them still there, sitting quietly near the wreckage of their ruined colony. They didn't speak much at first, but Ryan could see the gratefulness in their eyes. The bond between them was fragile, but it was there. They were beginning to trust him, and that meant more than words could explain. Ryan, too, was feeling something he hadn't expected. He had been alone for so long, surrounded by war and death. But here, on this strange and forgotten world, he had found something pure. A chance to connect, to help, to offer kindness where it was needed most. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something else, a lifeline. And in return, he could feel a subtle change in the twins. They were not the scared, fragile creatures they had been when he first found them. They were learning. They were starting to heal, and that was thanks to him. Despite their progress, Ryan knew they still had a long way to go. The twins couldn't speak English fluently, and communication between them was still difficult. The larger one, who Ryan had come to think of as the leader of the two, could form a few basic words. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. The smaller twin remained mostly silent, speaking only in soft, melodic tones that Ryan couldn't understand. Yet it wasn't just their words that mattered. There was something deeper, a need for connection, for understanding. The first breakthrough came when the larger twin spoke again, this time in a voice filled with more certainty. "You stay," it said, its eyes locked with Ryan's, a quiet plea hidden in the depths of its gaze. "You stay with us." Ryan hesitated, unsure of what the request meant. "Stay," he repeated, trying to understand. Was it asking him to remain here, on this dead planet? To help them rebuild? To protect them? The larger twin nodded. It was clear now that they had grown attached to him, even though they didn't fully understand his role in their lives. "We need more help. You stay. We learn." Ryan's heart softened. It was a simple request, but it carried a weight. They didn't know exactly what it meant for him to stay, whether it was just a need for food and shelter, or whether they wanted something more. But Ryan knew one thing. He couldn't leave them now. The promise he had made to himself, to protect them, was more than just a soldier's duty. It was personal. "I'll stay," Ryan replied, his voice firm but gentle. "But you need to learn. I'll teach you. We'll talk." The larger twin's face brightened, and Ryan could see the spark of hope in its eyes. It was a small victory, but it meant something. Over the next few days, Ryan began to teach the twins basic English, starting with simple words like food, water, and shelter. The twins didn't pick up the language quickly, but Ryan didn't mind. They were making progress, and that was enough. They would sit together, with Ryan holding up objects or pointing at things around them, and they would repeat the words after him. It was slow, sometimes frustrating, but with each passing day they learned more. The smaller twin, who Ryan had learned was named Zira, remained quieter than her sibling. She often watched her brother, who had taken to calling himself Kale, as he practiced the new words Ryan taught them. Zira's eyes would follow Kale's every movement, as though trying to understand the human way of communicating. Ryan didn't pressure her to speak. He understood that learning a new language was difficult, especially for someone who had never encountered humans before. One afternoon, as they sat in the shade of the crumbled ruins, Kale looked up at Ryan with a question in his eyes. "Why help us?" he asked, his voice still uncertain but more confident than before. "You no need us." Ryan's heart ached at the question. It was simple, but it revealed everything: the depth of the twins' vulnerability, the uncertainty of their existence. They had no one left. They were alone. And here was a soldier, someone from a race that had fought against theirs, offering them help. It was strange, and Kel couldn't understand why Ryan would choose to stay. To him, it was a mystery. "I help because—" Ryan paused, searching for the right words. "Because you need it. Because everyone deserves a chance, even if the world around us has forgotten that." Kale nodded, though he didn't fully understand. But Ryan could see that something had shifted in him. He was beginning to see that Ryan wasn't just a stranger, a soldier, or someone who would leave once the job was done. Ryan was someone who cared, and that made all the difference. As the days passed, Ryan's relationship with the twins deepened. He taught them more than just words. He taught them how to care for themselves, how to find food in the wild, how to repair basic technology, and how to keep safe from the dangerous wildlife that roamed the planet. Every lesson was an opportunity for trust to grow between them. Each time Ryan shared a piece of knowledge, each time the twins tried something new and succeeded, they grew closer. Kale and Zira began to see Ryan not just as a teacher, but as a friend, a protector. They no longer watched him with suspicion or fear, but with respect and admiration. In return, Ryan began to understand them better too. They weren't just strange, alien beings. They were survivors, just like him. They had lost their home, their people, their world, but they were still alive, still fighting to rebuild. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the ruins, Kale sat beside Ryan and looked up at the sky. "Do you miss your home?" he asked quietly. Ryan stared up at the stars, his mind drifting to Earth, the home he hadn't seen in years. He missed it, of course, but he had come to terms with the fact that he might never return. War had taken so much from him, and he had accepted that. But here, with the twins, he felt something different, something that felt like hope. "I miss it sometimes," Ryan answered honestly. "But right now, I have a new mission. You two need me, and I need you too." Cale looked at Ryan, his expression thoughtful. He had been learning more than just human words. He had been learning about emotions, about the bond that could exist between two very different species. The realization seemed to settle in his mind as he nodded slowly, accepting the truth. The twins were beginning to understand the complexities of their situation. They had always relied on their own kind, their own people, to survive. But now, they were learning that trust and survival came in many forms. The soldier, the human who had once been an outsider, was now part of their world. And though they didn't fully understand his reasons, they knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone anymore. The days turned into weeks, and Ryan continued to help the twins. They learned to communicate better, to understand the complexities of each other's lives. The once silent twins began to open up more, sharing their thoughts, their fears, and even their dreams of what could be. They spoke of their people, their home planet, which had been ravaged by disease and war. They spoke of what they had lost, and Ryan listened with empathy, never interrupting, never judging. He had been there too. He understood what it was like to lose everything. Through these quiet moments of sharing, of simply being there for each other, Ryan and the twins built a trust that was unspoken but deeply felt. It was a bond that would carry them forward, a bond that would survive whatever challenges lay ahead. And though the future was uncertain, Ryan knew one thing for sure: he wasn't just staying for the mission anymore. He was staying because he had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting. In the days that followed, as the stars filled the sky once again, Ryan, Cale, and Zira stood together in the ruins. They didn't need to say anything. The trust between them was enough. As the weeks passed, Ryan began to notice a change, not just in the twins, but in himself as well. It wasn't just the knowledge he was sharing with them, or the protection he offered. It was something deeper, something unexpected. The twins, Cale and Zira, had become a part of his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. They weren't just aliens he had found on a desolate planet. They were his companions, his friends, and somehow they were starting to feel like family. At first, it had been an act of kindness. Ryan had fed them, cared for them, and taught them the basics of survival. But over time, his relationship with them grew. He began to see them not just as fragile, frightened beings, but as individuals with personalities, dreams, and emotions. Cale, the older of the two, was bold and curious. He loved to explore, always eager to learn about the world around him. And he looked to Ryan with a trust that had only grown stronger over time. Zira, on the other hand, was more reserved. She spoke less than her brother, but Ryan could see the intelligence and depth in her eyes. Her quiet nature contrasted with Cale's energy, but they complemented each other perfectly. Ryan found himself looking forward to the quiet moments they spent together. Sometimes they would sit in the shade of the broken ruins, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Other times, they would explore the abandoned structures, trying to piece together what had happened to their people, to their planet. They had no answers, but Ryan wasn't sure they needed them. They were learning how to survive, and that was enough for now. One evening, as they gathered around a small fire, Ryan could feel the bond between them growing stronger. They sat close, Cale and Zira huddled together, and Ryan beside them, offering the warmth of the fire in the cold desert air. He looked down at the twins, watching the way they interacted with each other. Despite their differences, despite the loneliness that came with being the last survivors of their kind, they had each other. And Ryan had come to understand that, in some way, they had accepted him as one of their own. Cale broke the silence that had settled over them, his voice quiet but filled with curiosity. "Ryan," he said, his gaze never leaving the fire, "do you miss your home?" The question wasn't new. Ryan had heard it before, many times, in one form or another. But this time, it felt different. Kale wasn't just asking out of curiosity. He was trying to understand. He was trying to connect with Ryan on a deeper level. Ryan stared into the fire for a moment, his thoughts drifting to earth. He had missed it so much in the beginning. The green fields, the bustling cities, the faces of his family and friends. But now, after so many years, it was hard to say what he missed more, Earth itself, or the feeling of having a place to belong. "I do miss it," Ryan answered softly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to settle into the air. "But I've been away for so long, Kale. I think I've forgotten what it was like. And I think maybe I've started to find a new place, a new purpose, here, with you." The twins looked at him, their expressions unreadable but full of understanding. They had been through so much, and in their eyes, Ryan could see the same longing for a place to call home. Maybe it wasn't Earth. Maybe it was here, with each other, in the quiet solitude of this ruined world. The conversation drifted then, from Earth to their own planet. Kale spoke of the life they had once known, of the cities that had stood tall and proud, of the families they had lost. Zira joined in, her voice soft and hesitant as she described their people's customs, their history, and their culture. The more Ryan listened, the more he realized just how much they had lost. Their world had been a place of beauty and complexity, with art, science, and technology far beyond anything humans had achieved. And now, all of that was gone, wiped out by a plague that had ravaged their population. But even in their darkest moments, Ryan could see the glimmer of hope in Kale and Zira. They hadn't given up. They had survived. And now, they were rebuilding, together. As the fire crackled, Ryan felt a shift in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. The twins were no longer just looking at him as a source of survival. They were beginning to see him as something more. And though Ryan couldn't yet understand what that more was, he could feel the weight of it in their gaze. They were forming a connection with him, one that went beyond the simple need for food and shelter. They were starting to trust him, not just as a protector, but as a part of their future. The next morning, as the sun rose over the ruins, Ryan began his usual routine of checking the perimeter, making sure the area was safe from the creatures that roamed the planet. As he scanned the horizon, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Kale and Zira, walking toward him with a quiet determination in their step. "We want to help," Kale said, his voice filled with an energy that Ryan hadn't heard before. "We've learned so much from you, Ryan. We want to learn more. We want to rebuild." Ryan looked at them, his heart swelling with pride. They had come so far in such a short time. When he had first found them, they were weak and scared, unable to even speak clearly. But now, they were standing before him, ready to take on the world. They were no longer children in need of protection. They were becoming leaders, ready to take on the responsibility of their people's future. "I'm proud of you both," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're stronger than you know." Kale smiled, a rare expression for him, and Zira's eyes softened. Ryan realized that, in many ways, they had already started to rebuild. They had rebuilt their trust in him, and he had rebuilt their hope. And now, it seemed like they were ready to rebuild their world. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened even further. They worked together, learning from each other, sharing their skills and knowledge. Ryan taught them more about the human way of life, about the tools and technologies he had used in his time as a soldier. And the twins taught him about their own civilization, sharing the secrets of their advanced technology, their culture, and their history. The more Ryan learned about their people, the more he realized just how much they had to offer. Their technology was far more advanced than anything humans had, and their knowledge of the universe was vast. They had been on the brink of greatness, a civilization that could have changed the course of history. But now, all of that potential was lost, and it was up to Kale and Zira to carry on that legacy. As the days turned into weeks, Ryan could feel something growing inside him. It wasn't just the connection with the twins. It was something deeper, something he hadn't expected. He was beginning to care for them in ways that went beyond the role of a protector. He was beginning to see them as family, his family. And with that realization came a sense of responsibility. He had been sent to this planet on a mission, but now that mission had changed. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to help the twins rebuild, to help them carry on the legacy of their people. One evening, as they sat around the fire once more, Zira looked up at Ryan, her eyes filled with a quiet longing. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "will you stay with us? For the long time." Ryan met her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been thinking about this moment for days, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to say. Could he truly stay? Could he commit to this new life, to these new people who had become so important to him? But as he looked at Zira and Kale, their faces filled with hope, with trust, he knew that there was only one answer. "I will," he said quietly, his voice firm with certainty. "I will stay, for as long as you need me." The bond between them, the connection that had started as a simple act of kindness, had now grown into something unbreakable. And though their journey was far from over, Ryan knew that, together, they could rebuild not just their world, but their future. The days had passed, each one feeling like a step forward in a journey neither Ryan nor the twins could have predicted. The relationship they had built, one based on trust, survival, and mutual respect, had continued to grow. Ryan had taught Kale and Zira many things about the world of humans: survival skills, basic technology, and the importance of teamwork. In return, the twins had shared their knowledge of their home planet and their advanced technologies, allowing Ryan a glimpse into a civilization far beyond his own. The planet, once desolate and lifeless, had begun to feel a little less lonely. Ryan had found something here that he had thought was lost to him forever: companionship. He had spent years fighting in wars, seeing people die, losing friends and family. Now, with the twins, there was something different. It wasn't about fighting or surviving anymore. It was about rebuilding, about creating something new. But even with all the progress they had made, there was still an underlying tension, a sense of unspoken words hanging in the air. Ryan had noticed it more and more lately, particularly in the way Kale and Zira looked at him. They had become close, and that closeness had given rise to something more. The twins were no longer just looking to him as a protector or teacher. There was something else in their eyes, something more personal. And Ryan couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the broken landscape, Ryan sat alone by the fire. He had become accustomed to the quiet moments, the times when the world around him seemed to fade away, and he could just think. The sound of the crackling fire was comforting, a small piece of normalcy in a place that had none. Kale and Zira were sitting nearby, speaking softly to each other in their native language. Their voices were gentle, almost musical, and Ryan could hear the bond between them. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, Zira approached him quietly. She didn't speak at first, just stood there for a moment, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. It was as if she was waiting for something, waiting for him to notice her presence, waiting for the right moment to say what was on her mind. Ryan looked up at her, his gaze soft and curious. "Ryan," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper, "we need to talk." Ryan blinked in surprise, his heart racing a little. He had always felt like he understood the twins, but this was different. There was a weight in Zira's words, a heaviness that made him pause. Something was coming, something he hadn't expected. But he nodded and gestured for her to sit down beside him. "What's on your mind, Zira?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle but full of curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to Kale, who was sitting a little further away, watching them with a mix of interest and concern. Zira took a deep breath and then spoke again. "It's about us. About you," she began slowly. Kale and I, we've been thinking about you and what you mean to us." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. He had felt the connection growing between them, but he hadn't expected it to come to a head like this. He had always treated the twins as equals, as people who were learning and growing, not as something that could lead to deeper emotions. But the more Zira spoke, the more he realized that the twins had begun to see him in a different way. And though the realization made him nervous, it also made his heart ache with something he couldn't quite name. "I don't understand," Ryan said softly, his voice tinged with confusion. "What do you mean? You've both grown so much, and I've helped. I'm happy to help, but I don't." Zira raised her hand, silencing him gently. "It's not about you helping us, Ryan. It's about what you've become to us. You've become more than just a teacher, more than just someone who protects us. You've become someone we care for, someone we trust completely. And it's not just Kale. I feel it too." Ryan blinked, stunned by the weight of her words. For a moment, all he could do was look at her. Her eyes, filled with something that was both vulnerable and hopeful, seemed to pierce right through him. It was the first time he had ever seen her so open, so raw. He swallowed hard, trying to process what she was saying. He had never expected this. He had never expected to develop such strong feelings for the twins, especially in such a short time. But as he looked at Zira, sitting there before him, so open and sincere, he couldn't deny that he, too, felt something stirring inside him. A bond, a deep connection that went beyond friendship, beyond duty. It was something far more complicated and perhaps dangerous. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Ryan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I never planned on it. I didn't come here to form connections, to care about anyone." Zira nodded, her expression softening. "I know, but sometimes things happen, and we can't control them." She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The touch was gentle, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Ryan. He hadn't realized how much he had longed for connection, for something beyond the lonely existence he had been living. He had spent so many years fighting wars, seeing death and destruction, that he had built walls around himself to protect his heart. But Zira, in her quiet way, had managed to break through those walls. And now, as she spoke to him with such honesty, he could feel everything shifting. "I don't know what this means," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't deny that I feel it too. I care about you both, in ways I didn't expect. I didn't want to get attached, but I have." Zira's eyes softened even further, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "We don't want to be alone anymore, Ryan, and you don't have to be alone either. We care about you as more than just a protector. You've become a part of us, a part of our family." Ryan's heart clenched at her words. Family. He had thought he had lost his family when the war had torn everything apart. But now, here he was, on a distant planet, surrounded by two alien beings who had become more than just survivors. They had become his family. But the weight of the moment didn't escape him. This connection, this bond they were forming, it was complicated. The twins were still learning about human emotions, and Ryan was still learning how to navigate his own. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but he knew that it wasn't going to be easy. There were too many unknowns, too many risks. Before he could say anything more, Kale stood and walked over to them, his face serious but not unkind. He placed a hand on Zira's shoulder, his voice calm but filled with something that Ryan couldn't quite read. "It's true," Kale said, looking at Ryan with deep, steady eyes. "We don't want to be alone. And we want you with us. For as long as you'll stay, we both do." Ryan felt a weight settle on his chest. This wasn't just a confession from Zira. It was from both of them. They were asking him for something deeper, something more than just his help. They were asking for him to be a part of their lives in a way that went beyond survival. "I never expected any of this," Ryan said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "but I can't deny how I feel. I care about you both, And I want to be here, with you, no matter what happens." Zira and Kale exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. And in that moment, Ryan knew that he had made the right choice. He had chosen to stay, to protect them, and to help them rebuild their world. But now, it seemed that the bond they had formed was not just about survival. It was about something far more meaningful. As the fire flickered in the distance, casting shadows across the barren landscape, Ryan felt the weight of their confessions settle into his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same. They were no longer just survivors. They were family. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ryan stood at the edge of the ruined city, his eyes scanning the horizon as the wind whispered through the broken buildings. It had been a few days since Zira and Kale had confessed their feelings for him. Since that night, everything had changed. The world around him still felt empty and broken, but inside him, there was something new, a sense of belonging, a sense of hope. Yet, with it came confusion and fear, emotions that Ryan wasn't used to. He had spent years as a soldier, a protector, a survivor. His job had always been clear. But now, things were far more complicated. The twins, Kale and Zira, had become more than just survivors. They had become his family. They trusted him, depended on him, and cared for him in ways that went beyond anything he had ever experienced. They had become his anchor in a world that had lost its direction. But as much as he cared for them, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to make a choice that would change everything. And that choice, that decision, wasn't as easy as simply staying with them. In the back of his mind, Ryan could still hear the whispers of his past life, his mission, his training, the orders he had been given. He had been sent to this planet for a reason: to survive, to gather intel, and to protect. But now, with the twins in his life, he found himself torn. They had become his world, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that his duty as a soldier wasn't over yet. There was still a mission to complete, still something bigger that needed to be done. But could he really leave the twins behind? Could he abandon them after everything they had been through together? The decision weighed heavily on his shoulders. Ryan had never been one to make emotional decisions. He was a soldier, trained to follow orders and complete missions without hesitation. But this was different. This was personal. This was about more than just survival. It was about loyalty, love, and sacrifice. And Ryan wasn't sure if he was ready to make that sacrifice. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ruined city, Ryan heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He could sense Zira and Kale approaching, their presence familiar and comforting. They had become so much a part of his life that he could feel them, even before they spoke. Zira's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "Ryan, we've been talking. About what's next." Ryan turned to face them, his heart heavy with the weight of his thoughts. Cal's expression was serious, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a rare intensity. Zira's face was equally solemn, her eyes searching his face for some sign of what he was feeling. "I know you've been thinking a lot lately," Zira continued, her voice full of understanding. "And we've been thinking too. We know that things can't stay the way they are forever. We have to move forward. But we also want you to know that whatever you choose, we'll support you. We trust you." Ryan looked down at the ground, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know if I can leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can walk away from this. From you." Kale stepped forward, his expression hard but filled with a deep empathy. "You've already given us so much, Ryan. You've taught us how to survive. You've given us hope. But we also know that there's more out there for you. You've always been a soldier, and I can see that the mission isn't over for you. You can't ignore that." Ryan's chest tightened at Cal's words. They were right. He had spent so much of his life as a soldier, focused on missions and objectives, that he couldn't easily turn that part of him off. But the idea of leaving the twins, of walking away from everything they had built together, felt impossible. They were his family now, and family meant everything to him. But how could he live with himself if he abandoned his duty? "I don't want to leave you," Ryan said, his voice cracking. "But I don't know what's out there. I don't know if I can just walk away from everything I've been trained to do. If I do that, who am I? What do I become?" Zira reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm, her touch warm and comforting. "You become someone who chooses what's right for you, Ryan. You've been through so much, and you've already sacrificed so much for us. But now, it's your choice. You don't have to be just a soldier. You can be more than that. You can be someone who chooses love, chooses family." Ryan felt a lump form in his throat. He had always been so focused on duty, on survival, that he had forgotten what it was like to choose something for himself. He had been so caught up in the weight of his mission that he had forgotten how to live for himself, how to care for others beyond the battlefield. But here, with Zira and Kale, he had found something different. He had found a reason to fight that wasn't about orders or objectives. It was about them, about the people who had become his family. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Ryan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can choose." Kale stepped forward, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to choose everything right away. We just want you to know that we're here for you, no matter what. We don't want you to feel like you have to leave us behind. We're not asking you to give up your mission, but we want you to think about what really matters." Ryan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The soldier inside him told him to leave, to continue the mission, to follow his orders. But the man he had become, the man who cared for Zira and Kale, the man who had found a new sense of purpose, told him to stay. The conflict raged within him, tearing at his heart. He turned away, staring out at the horizon once more, trying to clear his mind. The winds swept across the desert, carrying with them the scent of dust and old memories. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt truly lost. He didn't know which path to take. The soldier in him wanted to push forward, to complete the mission. But the man he had become wanted to stay, to protect his family and build something new. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. It was Zira who broke the silence once more, her voice soft and steady. "You don't have to make a decision right now," she said gently. "We're here. We'll wait for you. Whatever you choose, we'll be with you." Ryan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you both." Kale placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. "No matter what happens, Ryan, we'll face it together. You don't have to carry this burden alone." As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, Ryan knew that he had to make a choice. But for the first time in his life, he realized that the choice wasn't about duty or mission. It was about love, about the people who had become his family. And no matter what path he chose, he knew he wouldn't be walking it alone. The future was uncertain, and Ryan didn't have all the answers. But in that moment, standing between Zira and Kale, he knew that whatever happened next, he would face it with them by his side. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, a sea of stars twinkling against the blackness, as if the universe itself was watching over them. It was a quiet night on the broken world, the kind of silence that made everything feel still, like time itself had paused. Ryan sat with Zira and Kale by the fire, the soft crackling of the flames, the only sound breaking the quiet. His mind was full, swirling with the weight of his decision. He had spent so much time wrestling with himself, unsure of what the right choice was. But now, in the presence of the twins, he finally understood. The choice had never been about what was right or wrong. It had always been about what he truly wanted, and what he was willing to fight for. The cold wind blew across the barren landscape, but around the fire, they were warm. Ryan looked at Zira and Kale, their faces glowing in the firelight, and he knew, deep in his heart, that he had made the right choice. The war, the battles, the endless missions, those were all behind him now. What mattered now was the future. Their future. Ryan took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel like a soldier. He didn't feel like a man burdened by duty and responsibility. Instead, he felt like someone with a purpose, a person who had found a family he would protect with everything he had. "You know," Ryan said quietly, his voice breaking the silence, "I've spent so many years fighting wars, following orders, and I never really stopped to think about what I was fighting for. I never really asked myself why I was doing it." Zira turned her gaze toward him, her eyes soft and filled with understanding. "You were fighting to survive," she said gently. "You were fighting to protect others. But you were also fighting because it was all you knew. You never had a choice." Ryan nodded slowly, a small, sad smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Yeah, I guess that's true. But now I have a choice, and it's a terrifying one." "I'm not afraid anymore," Ryan said, his voice steady now. "I've made my choice. I'm staying with you too. I'm staying to build a future, a real future." Zira smiled, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and happiness. "We're glad," she said softly. "We've never needed anyone as much as we need you. You've given us hope, Ryan. Hope that there's more to life than just surviving." Cale nodded in agreement. "You've taught us what it means to care, to trust, and we want to do the same for you. We want to be your family, Ryan, for as long as you'll have us." The fire crackled as the flames danced, casting flickering shadows on the ground around them. The warmth of the fire seemed to match the warmth in Ryan's chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The mission, the war, it was all behind him. What lay ahead was uncertain, yes, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the future, because he knew he wasn't walking into it alone. "Thank you," Ryan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you both for giving me a reason to hope again. I don't think I could have done it without you." Zira and Cale didn't say anything in reply. They didn't need to. Their presence, the quiet bond between them, spoke louder than any words ever could. They had been through so much together, so much loss, so much pain, but they had also found something beautiful in each other, something strong, something worth protecting. The night stretched on, and for a while, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The world around them might have been broken, but in that moment, sitting by the fire, they felt whole. There were no wars to fight, no enemies to face. There was just the peace of being together, of knowing that they were no longer alone. Eventually, the fire began to die down, the flames shrinking to glowing embers. The cool air began to creep in, signaling the arrival of another cold night. Zira stretched and stood up, her body moving with the grace of someone used to surviving in harsh conditions. Cale followed suit, standing up and stretching his arms above his head. "We should get some sleep," Cale said, his voice calm and steady. "Tomorrow's a new day, a new beginning." Ryan nodded, standing up as well. For the first time, the idea of tomorrow didn't fill him with dread. It wasn't just another day of survival. It was a day of rebuilding, a day of growth. And it was a day he would spend with the people who would become his family. As they settled into their makeshift camp, preparing to sleep under the stars, Ryan lay back and stared up at the night sky. The stars above seemed to stretch on forever, a reminder of how small they were in the grand scheme of things. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here, together. And together, they could face anything. For Ryan, this was more than just a new beginning for him personally. It was the beginning of something larger, something that could spread beyond the walls of their camp. It was the beginning of a future that was filled with the possibility of hope, love, and family. As sleep finally took hold of him, Ryan felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The soldier inside him had been replaced by a man who had learned the true meaning of family, and for the first time, he felt like he had a place in this broken world. The sun would rise tomorrow, as it always did, and with it, a new chapter of their journey would begin. Ryan didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: whatever happened, they would face it together. The past had shaped them, but the future was theirs to build, and that, for Ryan, was enough.